Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this panel on the afternoon of the second day of our Legacy Conference here. In this panel, we're going to be talking about the witness experience. We have a great group of people here to discuss with us the challenge of enabling witnesses to give their testimony about the events that happened, the crimes that were committed in the wars in the former Yugoslavia was recognised from the outset by the ICTY. The statute of the ICTY requires the protection of witnesses to be taken into account, and the very first rules of procedure and evidence order the Registrar to establish a unit that would take care not just of the protection of witnesses, but also provide counselling and support. So this awareness was there right from the beginning. The unit that was established pursuant to those rules, the Victims and Witness section, has slowly, over a long learning process, developed something that we're really very proud of in the registry, this witness-centred approach to support and protection. And it's something that we'd like to look at today. So in particular, we're going to discuss with this panel, what do witnesses need? What do witnesses need to be able to testify to these kind of atrocity crimes? What sorts of solutions did the ICTY come up with to respond to those needs? How have those solutions been translated, adopted or adapted already in the countries of the former Yugoslavia? And then finally, what gaps still remain and what recommendations can we make to move forward and improve services and facilitate the testimony of witnesses? I'll just introduce the panel. So to help us discuss these issues today, we have, if I start on my left, we have first of all Ms. Alma Tasso-Delkovic, who's head of the Witness Support Office here at the State Court. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her. We have Ms. Helena Vranovskoro, who has been running our Witness Support Unit in The Hague, and I'm happy to say we'll continue to provide witness support with the mechanism for international criminal tribunals. I have Professor Kimmy King, again probably known to many of you. Professor King has been involved with the ICTY for a long time, and we're particularly happy to have her here because she was our academic partner in the study, the research we did into the long-term needs of witnesses, where our staff interviewed 300 witnesses who testified before the ICTY, and Kimmy and her team worked with them to scientifically analyse what that said about the witness experience, and Kimmy will be speaking to that later. And finally, last but not least, I'm very pleased to welcome Jasna Zečević, who's here, of course, from Viva Žene organisation, which works as therapy and preparing witnesses for testimony. And maybe just to say that Jasna is here, and Jasna's colleague Teofika, who I think many of you also know, was also planning to attend, was unable to for health reasons. We're really happy that Jasna, as president of the association, could be here with us today. So the approach of the ICTY has been very much a witness-centred approach, and to keep this conversation witness-centred, we'd like to start off by listening to a very brief 1-minute video clip of a witness who testified before the state court, I believe, in Bosnia, talking about her experience. And this is a film that was made by Viva Žene, and we'd like to invite you to watch it with us now.
Slušajući prvu izjavu svjedoka, vidjeti prvo te ratne zločine koji su to uradili.
The audio right from the beginning. And no music.
Thank you.
Odlaskom prvi put u Beograd, slušajući prvu izjavu svjedoka, vidjeti prvo te ratne zločine koji su to uradili. Iako sam imala veliki strah i bila emocijama preplavljena plačom, tada sam dobila neku ljutnju da sam izgubila strah i emocije od ljutnji. I da sam, tada kad sam dala prvu izjavu, toliko sam imala potrebu da ispričam šta je se meni desilo, šta sam ja vidjela, kao što sam sve ja prošla. Već sam znala kako izgleda ta sudnica, pošto sam bila u sudnici kao praćila sam suđenje, ali ništa to nije olakšanje. Da kada je to olakšanje, čak i teže, jer sve vidiš šta, kroz sve šta prolazi svjedok jedan. Kakve ima sve, šta doživiš na hodniku od porodice optuženije, šta ti sve govori, prijetnje, da prijete svjedocima, da tek tad je počeo neki strah. Ili vidiš šta može se desiti.
Thank you. So that's a reminder of the kind of things that witnesses have to confront to testify to these crimes. So Jasna, I'd like to ask you to share with us from your long experience what you've seen witnesses, like the witness we just saw, need in order to be able to testify.
Hvala puno. Pozdravljam sve koji ste još uvijek ostali popodne.
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful for remaining with us here in the afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the ICTY because of their contribution to justice. But the most important thing that we have heard this morning is the prevention of impunity. We, as the center that work with victims of all forms of violence, have to say that we have worked with people who did take part in various trials. However, most of them testified about the atrocities of war that were experienced by all of us who lived here from 92 to 95. My colleague Teofika and I testified for the first time in 2001 in The Hague in the Krstić case. After that, Teofika Ibrahim Efendić testified in several more cases, Mladić, Karadzic, Plavšić, and so on. So our personal experience and our work with traumatized persons in 94, by the sentence in which it said that he would be fined 5,000 marks if he does not testify. His last testimony was rather unpleasant. He was told that he was protected witness. He maybe thought that he would also get some sort of support, but he didn't get any support. He had to see the accused himself in the courtroom. He was psychologically damaged, and he thought that now he was finished with testifying and that he wouldn't have to do anything else. However, 2 weeks before this new testimony, he came to ask for psychological support from us. However, all of us in the field know that 2 weeks are not sufficient for proper psychological support. Only a crisis intervention was possible. So when he started reminiscing on his previous experiences, he started showing various psychosomatic and physical symptoms. He was full of distrust towards the system, towards the judiciary, and he wanted the advice from us how to avoid all that. So he injured himself at the same time, because as member of the association, he was one of the activists who fought for the rights of the victims. And then he had to ask himself, if he refuses to testify, it means that he is working against his own principles. So he decided to testify after all. He was afraid that he would be blamed for bad testimony, for unprepared testimony. He almost felt like he was on trial himself. So he did not want to face this person again, the person who decided on his fate in a certain period of his life. But his support group managed to convince him that the testimony itself will empower him, because now he will be in the position to decide on the fate of the person who committed atrocities against him. He only had 3 meetings with the therapist before the court, and he also talked with members of his own association, and they talked about their own experiences, and they tried to find all the positive points about testifying. Why is it really necessary to testify? Sometimes even his own colleagues would tell him, what's the use of all this testifying? We testified 10 times already and justice will never be served. However, in the end, with our support, and I'm trying to speak very, very quickly to give more time to others. It wasn't so simple, it wasn't so brief, but in the end, they decided to ask the court whether the whole group could attend the trial. And that was the most important moment. This, according to his own words, was most important for him. The most difficult moment was entering the court and waiting in front of the courtroom, where the accused spouse was also waiting. It was a small room. The whole group was there, and they managed to give him support through his sense of humor. These are very ordinary, very human things. We are not talking about some extraordinary psychological interventions and techniques. And when he sat down and turned around, he saw his group, he saw his therapists, and then he stood up, and I'm going to skip his testimony, that's irrelevant, but I can say that at the end of the day in court, and we haven't spoken enough about that, I'm really sorry that we haven't spoken enough about this particular talk, because I think it deserves more thorough discussion. After the court, we debriefed him, and the whole group was able to amortize his fears, and it went on up until the pronouncing of the judgment, and it is still going on. So regardless if we are talking about the male or female witness, we are sure about one thing: they need long-term support. I would really like to commend Bosnia and Herzegovina at least in one thing, and that is the fact that they have support networks which are maybe not functioning at their fullest capacity yet, but they exist. How many? 14 or 15 in the territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina. We are still working on arranging the mechanisms which would enable that they are available to everyone at all time. And I'm not talking here about Viva Žene, I'm talking about the state, about the BIH. We should all be able to use the community resources. And in this particular case, it turned out that the greatest value, the greatest quality about this association of victims and witnesses is their support. I'm aware of the fact that sometimes they can do damage, but still, I think that the networks that the NGOs have established in the BIH, and I'm not going to mention their names because I might miss some of them. And by the way, these organizations all have representatives here, but we haven't been able to hear from them today and yesterday. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah. Jasna, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to hearing your comments also on other things that are raised. So the importance of local support networks, I think that's really interesting. And I think you also referred to the issue of post-testimony support. And I'm hoping to bring in some of the discussions from the side event, including the last very interesting intervention, into the discussion here in a moment. But first of all, Kimi, I think some of that will have been very familiar to you.
So one thing I want to say is how really brilliant a setup of that is. Because what we need to discuss here, and the reason why the ICTY can be considered pioneering is, and the important legacy that it will leave, is because of this exact kind of witness-centered approach. I can't thank you enough for how perfect an introduction that is to what it is that the witnesses go through. Do you want? We were going to be. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to go back and forth. We're not buying the linear thing.
No.
Yeah.
We're looping.
Yeah, we are. You're up.
So anyway, Kimi is going to give us a quick glimpse into the research that's been carried out and talk particularly about main stressors, main challenges for witnesses, and the ways that the witnesses she's looked at have found to overcome those.
We're good. Back first side, yes. So we begin here with a cross-section of witnesses in the region, and as an outside partner that was independent from the ICTY to do our own analysis, we were absolutely insistent on several criteria. We wanted OTP, we wanted defense, we wanted chambers witnesses, we wanted men, we wanted women, we wanted them in proper proportion to the way in which they had appeared. We wanted witnesses who had had protective measures. We wanted those who had not. And especially important is that we wanted witnesses who had testified repeatedly because they face unique challenges. So because international justice cannot be on the backs of the witnesses, we believe that it's important for everyone to understand that the most critical stakeholder in this entire process, even if it's a giant experiment that you are judging here for yourselves, whether it is a success or a failure, must not be a burden that is borne on the witnesses. So we've heard much that international criminal justice is complicated. But what we hope we communicate here today is that the witness experience is even more complicated and it is even more fraught because it is incredibly personal and it is enduring. It begins at the moment a witness gets a phone call, and it is going on to this day in the region. Understand that the challenges witnesses face are important. So our study looks at, and you will see me emphasize, we're relying on 253 men, 47 women. That's higher than the proportion of witnesses that actually appeared in the tribunal. Our initial focus groups indicated that women might be less likely to appear and participate in the survey. They are only 13% of trials at the tribunal, and what's even more interesting that you don't see here is that women are distinctively concentrated in what we'll call sexual violence trials. So we wanted to get a cross-section of women from all of these trials. So this is only looking at a snapshot. This is approximately 5 questions from about, this is only 5 questions from a survey that is over, 225 questions about what goes on when the witness enters the courtroom and the kind of challenges they face. We also look at what happens before and what happens after. So, when you look at the witnesses who are asked on the survey, what are challenges when they testify? You can see that delays, right? Men, it's about 21% of the male population, right? And about 25% of the female population find that delays in their testimony, things like it being postponed, et cetera, are difficult, right? The links of proofing. I can go into the series of questions later. I would love to have you see the survey, which is now out. We are most proud. It is out in BCS now. So please be sure to take it back and share it with the witnesses that you know, because we care very much about the experience that they've had. Then if you see here, being away from home and their families. So for men, it's only 11% cause a challenge, but for women, it's 27%. And understand that that's statistically significant. I'm a scientific nerd, so we run tests on things. And what this means is, in essence, that women are there's a disproportionate impact on them being away from their families when they go to testify. They face, and when we look at physical challenges that they face, about 1/3 of all male witnesses indicate physical challenge. That could be everything from a headache, right, to having the air conditioning on, being too cold, to it being too hot, to struggling with injuries that they are facing, and that makes testifying more difficult. But for women, 72% of women face physical challenges, and that is highly statistically significant. Now let's look at language. So language translation, what you just saw here when our monitor went out, the issues and the difficulties associated with language are also problematic. But interestingly, unlike the other factors we measure, it's more difficult for men than it is for women. Here, and this is something that we find very important, and it goes to the issue that the support groups are getting at, and why we hope that there will be support groups in the region to help witnesses, is this issue of anxiety and the concerns about anxiety. So here you see that men, again, about 1 in 3 men have anxiety in that regard, but that number is double for women in terms of dealing with anxiety. And again, it's statistically significant. Anything you see with an asterisk means that there's a disproportionate impact on men, or on women. Then the consequences of testifying, that too is a problem. Will I face future charges? Will somebody threaten my family? Will my home be burned down as a result of the fact that I came to testify? So I give you here a quick summary, but we'll revisit this later, but I wanted people to see when I say physical challenges, what kinds of things are you talking about? Well, hello. Anxiety should not be up here. It's in a separate category, but I just put it all up here on the same slide because that's where we surveyed it when we were asking the witnesses about the problems they had testifying. So you can see heart palpitations, dry mouth, crying, shortness of breath, headache, and then there are other categories that break down that discuss the issue of physical challenges. This is important as well. What relieves the physical or psychological stress of witnesses at the time that they testify? So when you look across the different categories, you will see that the only ones that are statistically significant, where there are, differences between men and women, are under VWS support as well as other support. So, but the numbers are quite high. I mean, you see that men, 44%, think that having VWS support is important for relieving the issues they face. For women, almost 2/3 need VWS support. Here as well, and with other support, here we're talking about the associations of your witness. We're talking about family, friends, a spouse. It might be coworkers. It could be religious leaders. And so that too is important for relieving stress. Here, time adjustment. So having delays and being away is difficult, but what can relieve it is time adjustments. And what's striking about time adjustments, and we need to emphasize this critically, this is not a monolithic experience where one size fits all for every single witness. For some witnesses, a time adjustment will be a postponement of their trial because they don't feel well. For other witnesses, it will be, could we move this along because I need to power through it and go home to be able to be with my family again. So what needs to be done in support at the different tribunals and trials is a recognition of just say to the witnesses in the first place, what is it that you need? How can we help? You see small numbers of people seek professional help, which is typical and something that we should talk about in terms of the psychosocial support that's available in the region. But what we do find when you dig deeper on the professional help is that particularly for people who've had large, trauma, or they've been detained for long periods of time, it's very important to work with that, as you know very well. We also ask them about substance use, and that's everything from drinking more coffee and smoking more cigarettes to taking prescription drugs and illicit drug usage as well. It was just an open question about all of the different substances. Here, So an internal strategy, and when we say an internal strategy, this is really a coping mechanism. And it is striking here that an internal strategy is one of, second only to witness support, is critical for witnesses. And it gets at something that one of the witnesses raised in the last section, and that was this idea of resilience. It's this idea that you have a mindset that I have survived this, I can survive anything. I need to do this to remember my mother, my father. I need to testify as part of my own personal resources for being able to present the evidence that I have. It's critical for witnesses. And then finally, there are distractions. And by this, these are things like taking a day off, going to the sea, walking through the flower gardens at Keukenhof, whatever it might be for the witnesses, to take their mind off of things. And then finally, security. Another great point. Where did it go? It was here. No, you see it's not there? When we ran the test, see the wording here? I'm going to have to present this to you. Somehow it's disappeared off the slide. So sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. 1 minute. Women have a backup plan. Hold on. Ready? Oh, can't run the slideshow. So, on this first one, if you look at it, what this says is that this is the overall security impact of challenges witnesses face.
Stick
what
with
am
the
I
same.
doing?
Is it you or is it?
I don't know. I don't know what happened. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So what this says, and be sure that the translation can get this okay, is that basically for men, about 23% face some sort of security threat. And I'm going to talk about what those security threats are. But about 27% of women face a security threat. So this is harm or injury. This is some kind of damage that has been done to them physically or to their friends or to their family. So it's a very real fear that witnesses have that in some way they will be harmed as a result of having testified. There's a higher number of vandalism. This number refers to vandalism. So about 6% face vandalism, 2% are women. Threats before and after testifying. These are threats with physical harm, threats to harm their family. This is not just being contacted and asked not to testify. These are the threats that appear. And then you see numbers of people who are contacted and asked not to testify. And then finally here, important for social support, I'm going to try to pull it up and get it. Important for social support is the loss of community. The last category says that 16% of men and 12% of women are criticized or ostracized from their groups as a result of having testified.
Many thanks, Kimmy. And as you saw from that, things going wrong there, Kimmy has loads more that she can talk about as well, some more hidden slides. Okay, but thanks for laying out what the main stresses are and the main ways that our witnesses at ICTY found to overcome those. I'm going to turn to Helena and just ask you, Helena, to briefly give us a picture of how the VWS operates, and then I'll ask Alma to talk about, first of all, how that's working in your court, and then maybe you can also give us a little comparison with the region. Helena.
Ja ću se malo vratiti u vrijeme, znači kada je osnovana...
I'm going to go back to the time when our service was founded. There were just 4 people, I want you to keep that in mind, who were supposed to organize and conceive this support that was to be provided to witnesses, which means that we were a first service in an international framework which was supposed to figure out what counseling was, what support was, and how to provide that to witnesses coming from 20 different countries. We could not rely on state services, which in national jurisdictions would have been able to assist regarding health insurance, I'm sorry, talking about health insurance, accommodation, and so on. At the same time, we need to see how to adapt our services to different profiles of witnesses. And then also, we needed to get organized to have available professional staff and staff that could provide answers to all the questions and provide support. So if we look, we actually were learning as we went along, providing constant support to witnesses. We spoke to witnesses. We would receive return information from them and what they needed for us to organize from The Hague. So everything that was an obstacle in the beginning, post-war period, how to travel, did somebody have a passport, did they need visas, how to reach someone, how to travel to The Hague with them. All these logistical issues, which were not foreseen in the beginning, actually were a cause of major stress for witnesses. So we had to see how to overcome these obstacles. We had to create protocols that we could use in future when working with the witnesses. The practical assistance and support was adapted to specific circumstances, to individual needs of witnesses. As somebody already said, we actually are witness-oriented. The witness to us is the center of everything. Everything moves from that center. There is no universal approach. There is no formula that you can simply apply to each witness. We are constantly in contact with witnesses, especially those that appear several times, because something that somebody needed 5 years ago may not be necessarily the same thing that they need today. In our discussions, we also mentioned how witnesses know very well what they need. You simply need to ask them and listen to them and not set off from the point of view that we know everything and that we will deal with everything. Testifying before an international court can really be frightening. Most of our witnesses didn't even testify before local courts, never mind travel to The Hague, testify in unfamiliar circumstances and an environment that already is very stressful. Also leaving their familiar circumstances, their family, and coming to a place that they don't know at all. So we've seen that we need to have an integrated approach to all of our services in 3 main fields. We need to focus on the logistics. Then there is the security unit, which would respond to some security issues and needs, and then also our support unit. So within the past 25 years, I just want to refer to some mechanisms that have appeared for good support to witnesses. One is providing information. We have seen that information is something that witnesses require, what to expect, because only when they know what they can expect, they can tell us what they need. For example, if we find out that a witness cannot come because they don't know how to deal with their child. Can they bring the child with them? Can they find somebody to take care of the child while they're away? So this is something that is most important to them. They are not thinking about testifying at all. So we need to resolve this issue first. So we try to modify our protocols so that, for example, compensation for child care or taking care of the elderly or financing so that the person can bring a support person, a therapist sometimes even, or a spouse or a family member to be with them while they're in The Hague. Another thing is also the support network. We tried also to provide a 24-hour support network within our service. People come to an unfamiliar place, they don't speak the language. So from the very first moment when they land, and for you, those of you who know how big Skiphole is and how easily you can get lost there, witnesses can respond in a very stressful way to this. So we try to organize ourselves so that somebody is always there, so that they can answer all the questions a witness may have, so that they can support them in their own mother tongue. Another thing that I would like to mention is that absence from home can also result in negative effects, such as financial or economic ones. So over the years, we have managed to standardize UN rules as far as reimbursing witnesses, for example, for their travel costs. And you can imagine how hard that can be according to UN rules to reimburse somebody for their travel, for staying in The Hague for 10 days. We have to figure out payment for per diem, for the hotel costs and their meals. And we are quite far away from the region, so we had to find ways to get close to the region. This took a while, but in 2001, our field office opened in Sarajevo, and so we had representatives of our unit there who tried in an integrated manner to provide witnesses with support, where the witness was the focus. They could visit the witness at home, evaluate the situation, see the context in which they were living, and then adapt our attitude towards the witness so that they could know what they could expect. We would try to avoid them having too great expectations and prevent them from getting disappointed. We would discuss what the role of the tribunal was, what the role of our unit was, what we could do, what our services were, and where the boundary was of what we could do. So we could provide these information packages. We would have contacts with witnesses to explain to them exactly what they could expect. And then there were contacts and ties with local government and non-government organizations. After a witness testifies, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, or however long after testimony, some things are required that are not directly connected to testifying, but they are important to the witness. And then sometimes we cannot provide the support or the services they need. So that is why we tried to form a network with government and non-government offices here in the region so that we could refer the witnesses to the right place. And we heard earlier today that this network is still being developed. So perhaps this is something that would merit further discussion. And this is all I have for now.
Thank you very much, Helena, for trying to give us the history as well as the function of the unit very effectively in a short time. Just before I hand over to you, Alma, I just wanted to maybe highlight, it struck me also in the session earlier, that this witness-centered approach, as you described it, so when you really think, what does the witness need, and you listen to what witnesses say, and you ask witnesses what they need, in a way the tribunal was able to experiment with that because we were not operating within the usual ministries and structures of a state. Yes. So everything had to be created, and so it was fairly easy to create it around the witness. And I think maybe you can talk, Alma, about how it's slightly different trying to bring that approach into an existing state structure with different ministries responsible for different elements. And anyway, please.
Hvala puno, teško, mogu reći. Ali prije nego što uopće se obratim, želim prvo da vas pozdravim sviju. Hvala vam što ste se odazvali u velikom broju popodnevne sesije.
Thank you for being so numerous here in the afternoon session. That's not always the case. On the other hand, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share our experiences in witness support. Witness support is a rather broad concept. I would say that it consists of 1,000 segments. I could talk about all of them, but a lot has already been said. I would like to say something more about the central topic of this conference, and that is the legacy of the ICTY. I think that one of the more important aspects of ICTY legacy is us, and I really stand behind this. You set up your unit in 1995. In 2005, the first similar departments was set up in the region, and that is us here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the problems that you've encountered in 1995, we've encountered in 2005. Thanks to the international community that recognized the importance of this segment of judiciary, we were established at the state court, but still we began functioning in very difficult circumstances. What was difficult? Well, there was an existing judicial system, and now you started importing social workers, psychologists, somebody who is looking at the process from a different viewpoint. Those people were also supposed to inform the prosecutors and the judges about other things, and that was a bit of a ruffling feathers, so to speak. It was not easy to set up this sort of communication. I'm now speaking only about the witness support departments of the prosecutor's offices and the court. It wasn't easy. In 2006, the same thing was set up in Croatia and Serbia. Hello to Slavica and hello to Nikica. The three of us were really turned towards each other from the very beginning. We had to find out the solutions in building the victim support mechanism in our courts. Now, a few more words about Bosnia and Herzegovina and the state court. We adopted some solutions from the Hague Tribunal. However, we had to change some of the other aspects and adapt it to the region and to the people that we were dealing with. Victims, survivors, damaged parties, those who decided to speak up. We had to be here, we had to work for them, because we are some sort of extended hand, we are their voice. We transmit their needs to prosecutors and judges. And believe me, it's not simple. I mean, many of you did attend court, not just in the BIH, but in The Hague as well. And even when I visit the ICC, I have to undergo the same procedure at the entrance. Now, imagine a person who doesn't speak the language, doesn't know the procedure. He is met by the judiciary police, one security check, another security check, reception, this and that. So you really have to have someone whom you know who is there with you. And this also helps to bring down anxiety, because that person wants to focus on their main task, and they really want to have enough power, and they want to feel empowered to say what they have to say. One of the differences between us here in the BIH and Helena's department is the following. Support and protection used to be separated, institutionally separated. And it was difficult to resolve this, because you have to provide both support and protection. And it's not always easy to communicate between two different institutions in order to sail through all the procedures and rules. Our problems were well understood, and we did manage to resolve this. And now, in our 12th year of existence, we have an excellent cooperation with the Witness Department in SIPI, the state agency. So we managed to overcome those differences, and we managed to invent a new mode of communication. Other departments were then set up in the region, and each of them chose their own direction of development depending on the individual local needs. So that today, 12 years after, you have several different models of the functioning of these departments. Yesterday, I heard from my colleague Slavica that people who are in charge of giving support to witnesses are now undergoing training, not only for the War Crimes Department, but at other courts as well. In Croatia, we have a volunteer-based system that is really well developed and providing an excellent level of support. As for the BIH, we wanted to keep our witness-based approach. And we wanted to have a situation in which all people dealing with witnesses are devoted to witnesses. We know that we have limitations. We know that we can only function in the period during giving testimony. But we are trying to do our job in the best possible way and in the most professional way so that we could give the most to the witness. We are here for them. Today, in the BIH, there are 17 witness support departments. They are working actively not only in the war crimes trial, but in all trials involving victims who are in need of psychological, emotional, and other support. We really invested a lot of effort into developing our strategy. We are still developing those mechanisms, and we are really trying to fulfill our task. We are also very well aware of our limitations. After the testimony, after the judgment, after the appellate judgment, we are not in a position to give any sort of support except listening to their telephone calls. That is the reason why we try to find out ways for further support. Together with other organizations such as Viva Žene and others, we took part in the development of what we call a Referral Network. We are one of the contact points for witnesses. Those witnesses who try to contact us can now be referred to support networks in their own local communities. So all the witnesses before the state court and other courts in the BIH can now function within those local support networks and can avail themselves of their resources. We cannot really give a definitive answer to the question, what does a witness need? But we can help them. We can help witnesses to do what they need to do and to get the support that they need. Psychological, emotional, social, we are here for them to help them. And one more other thing, our success that I have already mentioned, but I want to say a few more words. And that is the manner in which we confronted the issue of compensation and damages. So what are we doing about it? We, of course, want to help all the victims and witnesses, and we want to help them in the process of the compensation claim. We are not legal staff. Our capabilities are limited, but we certainly don't want to set those needs aside. This is something important for our witnesses, and that is why we have to be able to provide that sort of support as well. This is about everything that I wanted to say, but I'm still here. If you need anything more, I am available for questions.
Great, Alma, thank you very much. I just quickly wanted to ask Jasna, I mean, we hear about the referral from your office, the networks, that there are needs which can't be fulfilled by your office and are maybe not by the state, and certainly you look to NGOs. Jasna, from your perspective, do you think that there is an adequate network? Does that network that exists, is it enough for the witnesses today?
Ja sam upravo i rekla da su mreže tek pri kraju formiranja.
I have already stated that we are about to finish the process of the establishment of those networks. Some of them are already established, but some of them are still being established. I'm not able to speak on behalf of witnesses, and I'm not able to say whether all their needs are satisfied. However, I think that the existing networks are capable of satisfying those needs. On the other hand, once a witness is finished with testifying and he returns to his local community, he should not be left to himself to look around for help. There should be psychosocial groups, support associations. They should know that a witness has just testified, and they should offer their support, because many witnesses are not capable of saying, oh, I need this or I need that. So long-term association and information exchange is very important in this regard. Witnesses, of course, are not all the same. Oh, we could speak for hours about that. Some witnesses simply need a little bit of emotional support after trial. For instance, having a coffee with the witness. Some other witnesses are in need of psychotherapy after the trials. Some witnesses are dissatisfied with the judgment or even with themselves. For instance, we heard something about reducing sentences on appeal. And that leads you all the time to the conversation about what is justice and what is judiciary. And anybody could talk about that. There are many other issues. Why are some sentences reduced? What is plea bargaining? What is... And another thing I want to say, people who have finished their sentences, convicted persons who are released, are now coming back to their communities. From the legal point of view, they are done. They have repaid their debt to the society, but they are coming back to their communities. What kind of effect is going to that have on others, on those whose trials are still ongoing? So I think that we are now entering a rather risky phase. We have to think about their children who are growing. Here in BIH, I think that we are on a good course. We are doing our best. We are not ideal, but I think that we fit perfectly as pieces of a great puzzle. Thank you.
Kimi.
No, I just simply wanted to say, to follow up on your excellent point, now you can see what it is, the situation that they return to in the community with the proper numbers there. But that is exactly part of the problem that we have to think about is, and this is just looking at the security impact. You're also raising points about, did they lose their job? Did they get did they get demoted at work? There are other consequences that also result that we discuss in there. Very few seek reparations is one of the really upsetting things that we found in the survey. Very few actually reach out and do that.
Please.
I would like to add one more thing. Witness support is a very broad concept. And it is impossible to overstate the roles of the NGO sector, of the various associations with whom we have an excellent cooperation. Our department is part of a huge system. We are a small cog in the wheel, and we have to work together with everybody else in order to provide better support. Not the existing support, but a better support. We can always be better. So I think it's very good that we have recognized this, and we have to listen to the criticisms, and we have to hear what our problems are, and if we are capable of doing something, we will. We have the cooperation of all the international organizations. They support our work, and we can certainly do more. We have achieved a lot. 12 years ago, we had nothing. Now we have a well-functioning system. However, I think we are still capable of further development. Thank you.
Alma, I don't know whether you or maybe somebody in the audience can talk about whether that's also how that compares to other countries in the region affected by the conflict. So I know you recently authored a report from UNDP on the courts witness support units, but I wonder whether these, so it's interesting to hear about that, but I'm thinking about this network, which seems to be really the key to the success that you're talking about, and whether that's also the case in Croatia, in Serbia, and so on. I'm not sure I think we may well have people here who can talk about it, or maybe you can start us.
To je zaista dobra tačka.
It's a very good point. I hope that my colleagues from Croatia and Serbia could expound on the situation in their countries, because it's different from our situation. At certain moments in time, some of us progressed a little bit more, some of us a little bit less, but we all try to recognize the needs at all levels. One more thing that I haven't mentioned. We are about to publish a recent investigation, a research into the situation with the witness support at our court. We are about to publish the results. Of course, the situation is not perfect, as I have already stated, but we have recommendations for further development. And I think that our recommendations should be applicable to other countries in the region. So I think it would be very good if my colleagues could share their experiences and describe the situation in their countries.
Do I have any volunteers? And have we got the microphone for the speakers? Oh, yeah, thank you. So that's wonderful. Yeah, at the back. At the back.
Dobar dan, želim da vas pozdravim. Moje ime je Slavica Pejković.
My name is Slavica Pejković, and I represent Victims and Witnesses Support Section from the Special Department of the Higher Court in Belgrade. War crimes trials in Serbia are concentrated at one court. This is where we differ from the situation in Bosnia and Croatia, where they have a number of courts processing war crimes. We've been established in 2006, which means that we have now been existing for 11 years. We only have 2 employees in the witness support segment. We have processed lots of witnesses. We have gained huge experience. More than 3,000 witnesses received some sort of support from us. I have to say that until very recently, we were the only service that offered support to victims and witnesses during testimony. We follow the same principles as the BIH service. We have been established at approximately the same time. We have used also the Hague Tribunal and their experiences. They were very important for us, especially when we were setting it up. We supply support services to all witnesses. That means also during the investigation, during the testimony at trial. And quite recently, our criminal procedure was changed, which means that from now on, investigation is in the hands of the prosecutor's office. Now, that means that the witness should also be supported during this phase of the criminal proceedings. So in turn, various prosecutors' offices have set up their own witness support services. So in contrast to the previous period when we were the only such service, and we functioned only at the State Court for War Crimes, now we have several services. Each higher court has witness support services. Also, this year, all the prosecutors' offices, including organized crime and war crimes prosecutors' offices, also set up their own witness support services. We also provide support to witnesses who come from abroad, pursuant to a court order. As we know, most of the crimes occurred outside the territory of Serbia. Our cooperation with other courts in the region and other witness support services in the region are excellent. Because if you have an old and frail witness and they are unable to travel abroad, they have the possibility to testify via video link. We support those witnesses as well, in the same manner as if they were testifying viva voce before our court. I would also like to emphasize that we have the cooperation in the reverse direction as well. A lot of time has elapsed. I heard one of my colleagues from Croatia, she said that many witnesses are quite eager to testify and to respond to court summons. That's not my experience. My experience is that it is unpleasant to delve into the past, an ugly past again, and to confront somebody who has committed the greatest evil that they have ever experienced in their life. They are living their lives. They have other problems. They had to face their own traumas. Some of them availed themselves of the services offered by the NGOs, some of them not. I don't want to speak about that again because I think we have touched upon that subject in a sufficient manner. But everybody finds it difficult when they have to start talking about it all over again.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and that is that I very much like the fact that I'm seeing all these networks developing in Bosnia. I always say we, as us working in these services, we really try to do our utmost, but our limitations are quite strict, unfortunately, and we have very little time for this kind of support. And I think that the role of associations, of NGOs, is exceptionally important to help the witness to reach the court and also to support them after testifying. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we've got two questions, and I'd also like to hear from Nikica maybe briefly about the networks in Croatia. But why don't we take the two questions over here, quickly? Oh, mustn't move that microphone.
Ja bih htjela nešto da dodam iz iskustva nevladine organizacije.
I wanted to talk about the experiences of an NGO, and I wanted to try to tell all those who are listening that the experiences of the countries in the region are different, and that it's one thing to offer support to victims from a different community, from a different country, to support and provide protection to insiders, and it is especially alarming to think why today there is less trust among witnesses in state institutions, and why fewer witnesses appear before courts regarding states that they consider responsible. The Serbian representative said that the service has limitations. One of these limitations is their work hours. They work during work hours. After that, there are no witnesses, there is no support, there is nothing beyond that. Secondly, and this is something that I can talk about when we're talking about the experiences in the region, these state services, or rather court services, mainly focus on defense witnesses. And this is something completely different from the situation when it is primarily necessary to get into contact, to encourage and succeed in persuading witnesses from other ethnic communities to appear before states that they consider to be responsible. The Fund for Humanitarian Law has an invaluable experience from 2003 when it managed to help and support and provide legal assistance to witnesses who required that. The first activity was in 2003, or actually in 2002. It was not known what security or protection measures meant for witnesses who came from a different country, from a different ethnic community, in cases where members of some military unit perhaps were on trial. The Fund for Humanitarian Law then linked up the families to make it possible for them to follow the trials. At the same time, it had the opportunity to monitor the situation in the entire region, and it could monitor, identify, and encourage witnesses to come and testify. And then once it could prepare the witnesses, consult with them, and then the state service, in agreement with the Fund for Humanitarian Law, would greet the witnesses at the border. This was during trials for the awful crimes in Zvornik, for the crimes committed in Croatia, in Lovas, in Ovčara. This happened for the trials of crimes that occurred in Kosovo. So today, when we look back, it was a time of major steps forward and progress regarding the testimony of witnesses and victims from other ethnic communities. Now, this confidence in state institutions and trust has been lost. Only those appear for trials who have a very powerful feeling that they need to do something for their families, even if they had to come 10 times each month and had to face with postponements of hearings and so on. This is the situation, first of all, before the trial, the court in Serbia. They're facing the problem of a challenge posed by lack of trust. They seem to be going backwards compared to what happened before. Just one moment. You cannot reduce things down to associations when there are state services. Associations, for the most part, are elderly people with health problems, so it's not a matter of simply saying that associations should take over the care for witnesses in local communities. I think this is too easily said and without too much thinking about what the actual situation entails.
Thank you. Very important point about responsibility. I think Jasna would like to just comment on that quickly.
Ja bih htjela samo da se ne razumijemo pogrešno, ako je mreža...
I don't want to be misunderstood. The networks established in Bosnia and Herzegovina also includes associations, but it also includes prosecutors, societies for the support of witnesses. We did not think, nor did we mean to say that the association will take over responsibility for what you are talking about. I'm just saying that they are important for the support of witnesses who live in that area, but they are not the only ones who are responsible. There are all those. They look to the needs of witnesses and try to provide this assistance, but the responsibility for witnesses should not fall to NGOs. Primarily, the one who's responsible is the state. So we don't want this to be misunderstood. We did not want to say that the primary responsibility for witnesses lies with the associations.
Yes, thank you, both of you. I think that's a very important point, but we're, I think, talking about collaboration in areas where perhaps the state is not the appropriate actor and better support can be obtained perhaps from the local community and so on. I just want to collect perhaps a few last remarks, and then I'll ask the panelists if they want to come in with any last conclusions, because we're reaching the end of our time. So one here in the front row. If you could just keep your intervention relatively short so I can take a few and then we'll wrap up.
My name is Una Kelly. I work at the EU delegation in Belgrade in Serbia. I used to work here in Bosnia. I deal with assistance projects for the justice sector, including war crimes. Thank you very much for the panel and for the organisation. It's extremely interesting discussion. And I think, as Alma pointed out, there are 1,000 elements when we deal with witness support. I mean, the way I look at it is that it starts immediately after the crime is committed, and it's potentially needed until potentially, depending on the nature of the crime, when the person, the victim, dies. And it's highly complex. I just want to make a few points. One is, I think it's really unfortunate that we're still dealing with really basic issues when it comes to witness support. The issues like logistics. So we hear that there's a model in Croatia that, you know, the victims and the witnesses, that logistics are arranged for them, whereas it's not necessarily the case in other countries as well. And that we're dealing with basic issues where we know the people who often provide evidence are essentially from challenging economic backgrounds. So they don't have the funds essentially to pay for the bus or whatever it is, or they have to borrow a suit to come to court. And I think it's very unfortunate that we're at this very basic level after such a long time. The second point is in relation to, it's something that's been picked up in independent reports in Serbia, but I think it also may apply in other countries. I know in Bosnia there was an issue basically about victim statements being anonymized in judgments, and we know that this is an issue where I work, but I think it's also not alone just there. So in light of the statistics that you provide related to security and being ostracized by society, I would be interested to know how important do you think that is, that the witnesses' names or victims' names appear in judgments at all, basically all instances. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will keep it very brief. We also gave the witnesses, first, we need to begin establishing best practices for witnesses. We need to create uniformity. And when you look at the witnesses in terms of what has been said, they have the opportunity to give feedback, and witnesses do discuss that they were called things or that they didn't feel safe. Since we talked about male-female divide, men who have testified in 2 or more trials with protective measures are statistically significant to feel less secure. So there's also an issue with men today regarding these kinds of things, and you see that coming from the witnesses. Talk to me.
Thank you. I'll get just perhaps 2 more comments, one over here, and...
Prvo da se predstavim, ja sam Suljo Kmetaš,
I'm Suljo Ahmetaš. I am the president of the concentration camp inmates. I would like to welcome the president of the Hague Tribunal, who is with us the whole time. When we talk about the victims and the perpetrators, and we've heard that in the previous panel, it is my modest opinion, based on everything that was said, that those who committed crimes enjoy better support and assistance than the victims. We're speaking here about networks and so on, and this is a very good thing. The networks have been set up, they are useful. However, the local societies bore the biggest burden since the beginning of the war, particularly local communities that people returned among those who committed the crimes, where representatives of local communities could also be the perpetrators of the crimes, and they protect each other. So here I have to give my comments. You all heard when the presidency member here spoke to all of us, gave us a lesson, to the prosecutor, the president, talking, and to all of us saying that the joint criminal enterprise should be left out. It should be erased. This is something that the victims have known for a long time, that there is a substantial lobby to abolish this concept, and this is something, I'm sorry, I have to say, so it supports this concept and provides support to those in Mostar who were convicted. Songs were sung, the same ones that were sung when the crimes were being perpetrated. So you can imagine how the victims who live there feel. I'm just asking you if this is all right.
No, I understand this is an important issue, but I think it goes beyond the scope of what we're just trying to achieve now. And actually, we've also run out of time, but I'd like to just ask you to stay 2 more minutes. Thank you nonetheless for making your important point again about how complex it is to rely on official authorities in a place where the conflict has been taking place. I think that's very valuable. I'll just take one comment because I had one very persistent person with their hand up right here, and then I'm going to very quickly ask the panelists if they'd like to make some closing remarks.
I'll be very brief. Firstly, I just wanted to thank Kimmy for your point about resilience, because I think this is such an important issue, and we tend to often generalize about victims that they're all really, really traumatized, but actually many of them have these really strong internal resources, and we don't acknowledge that enough. So thank you for making that really important point. And my question really was for Helena. In 2008, I think it was, Eric Stover published a book on the witnesses. I found the same thing, Kimmy, I know you have. Witnesses say they're treated very, very well at the ICTY. They're really looked after. But the issue is that when they go back to their communities, there's no more sort of correspondence from the tribunal. And we know that one of the reasons why testifying is important is that it's a validation. It gives victims an opportunity to be acknowledged, their suffering to be acknowledged. But then they feel that when they go back home, they're just forgotten about. And Stover says, you know, they feel like rubbish. They feel like they're just tossed aside. So my question is there any way of dealing with that? And can the tribunal have done anything more in that regard? Thank you.
And can I ask you, Helena, also maybe to go on to just give us what you think your key lessons learned are from your experience at the ICTY?
Da, ja bih rekla da je to u stvari jedna od najbitnijih stvari koje smo vidjeli kroz ovo istraživanje.
I would say that this is one of the key things we saw in our study, that the program of monitoring witnesses after testimony, we needed a couple of years to figure out how, with our given resources, to standardize programs so that we could follow up with the witnesses. A couple of years ago, we figured out that 4 to 6 weeks after a witness returns from testimony is the best time to call them back, to speak with them, to ask them, is there something else that you would like to share with us? Unfortunately, this was not possible when we had 6 simultaneous trials, when the volume of work was so vast that we could only focus on the immediate period before testimony and the period during testimony. So this was the main challenge for the future, to see how these short-term and long-term activities that we discussed here, we could streamline and standardize what the court can do other than brief telephone calls or meetings, and then what are the organizations, the NGOs, members of the network, other organizations that could follow up with the witnesses and give them their needed support in the long term. I just wanted to say a couple of things that we learned in our work to provide adequate support. One thing is resources. The staff, for example, waiting rooms, so that the witness could be in the waiting room before beginning the testimony. So we're talking about infrastructure. The other thing is that we really need to take care of the people who are taking care of the witnesses. Of course, we're all professionals, but we're also human. And in order for us to be able to provide good support, we ourselves have to be okay. And we provided this service to each other. But sometimes the pressure is so great, there's so much work, we want to do our utmost for the witnesses that we forget about ourselves. So it's a major challenge to find time in all of this to take care of ourselves as well as of our witnesses.
Thank you, Helena. Alma, did you have some last reflections?
Thank you. I'm sorry we don't have more time for discussion and for your thoughts. I would like to hear more. I have said all I wanted to say. I just wanted to say that we are going to respect key aspects, and that is respect, support, protection, and justice as far as our proceedings are concerned at the BH court. These are the 4 issues that we will focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I also regret that we haven't been able to follow up more, but I mean, we've heard witness-centered, we've heard responsibility between state and NGOs, we've heard networks, we've heard proactive, we've heard long-term, complex, potentially lifelong support. Jasna, any last words?
I would just like to talk about complexity. I would like to say that as individuals in Bosnia and Herzegovina, since we're fragmented and we have all kinds of complexities regarding our political structure, so all of us as individuals are responsible for seeing how long and how much time it will take for us to close this topic and this chapter.
And so on, yeah, and on that
Kimmy,
note,
please.
On that note, I would like to thank, if you are a witness and testified in any trial before the state courts or before the ICTY, I want to thank you for your time, because without you, no peace will ever be possible.
Thank you. Apologies to everybody I didn't call on. I'm really pleased to see there's so much to say and that witnesses are getting so much attention. And thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists.